Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith Arian. I'm president of the Board of Trustees of the Shaker Historical Society. Well, on behalf of the board and our staff, welcome to our, what I think is about our 76th on and off annual meeting. I know for a lot of years we didn't have it, but this year it will be our 77th year in existence since 1947. So welcome, and we have a great program today. Brianna is going to be presenting along with Kara. As you see their pictures, I wasn't good looking enough to get my picture, but that's okay. Anyways, thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoy the program. I'm now going to introduce you, Brianna, our executive director.
Next slide. Oh. There we go. Okay. Hello, my name is Brianna Treleven. I'm the executive director of the Shaker Historical Society. If you've never met me, I joined in January 2020, and then obviously the pandemic hit in March. So Keith loves to joke that I brought the pandemic with me, but I don't think that's true. So I'm going to be going over just a little bit of some of the highlights in relation to kind of collections and exhibits. And then Kate, our operations and events manager, will follow up talking about programs and some of our fundraising events and bigger events. But one of the things that the way that we've kind of, when we did rebranding, we thought about values that were important to us. And so two of those were preservation and discovery. And so I kind of think of those as covering some of our programs and exhibits, research with our collections, stuff like that. So some of the highlights from 2023 included a second collaboration with SAMS, Shaker African American Mother Support. We had done an exhibit with them in 2022, I want to say. I feel like the pandemic years just all blend together. So excuse me if I get some dates wrong. But we collaborated with Kim Harris again for an exhibit called Letters to My Father. That was an opportunity for Black men in the community to write letters to historical figures who have influenced them. And it was a really, I thought, rewarding experience to read these reflections and these letters that talked about progress that's been made or progress that hasn't been made. And it's definitely a perspective that we don't currently share in the museum because our museum was founded to talk about the Shakers, the religious sect. And so most of our museum focuses on either Shaker history or the white history of early Shaker Heights development. And so working with Kim was a way for us to kind of bring in voices to the museum that are normally represented. And we are continually seeking opportunities to do that while we kind of think behind the scenes of how we can expand our permanent exhibits, which always takes more time and more money than you think it's going to. And so it's just a lot slower going. It was also our second year of working with the Humanities at Work program through Case Western Reserve University, which is a program that is designed to place humanities students at humanities organizations. And the nice thing about it is that, like us, it's difficult for a lot of humanities organizations to fund interns. But we believe very strongly in paying interns. In my academic career, I had only done unpaid internships. And it's really only available to the privileged because who can afford to do 6 months of unpaid work? So we have started focusing on getting grants or working with this program to fund internships. And so with Humanities at Work, if the organization is unable to pay, Case will pay the intern. So it's a really nice balance between having a budget that maybe doesn't allow for multiple interns during the course of a year, and being able to make sure that our interns are being compensated. And so one of the things in the bottom right corner, this is actually a screenshot from a digital exhibit that was put together by one of the interns named Rafiq Sadki. And he had digitized images from the Van Swearingen promotional booklets and mapped them out. And this is available on our website under digital exhibits. But we get so many questions about, is my house in one of the books, that I really wanted to for the project, put together a spreadsheet that listed everything. And then Rafik kind of went a step further and decided to map it out. So when you look at the website, you can really get a sense of those houses in the northern neighborhoods that were being promoted by the Van Swearingens at that time. It's just a really, really cool tool. And it's nice to be able now when people say, is my house, do you have photos of my house? I can just send them a link to one of these pages. Over the summer, we also hosted an intern, Rachel Sykes. This project was funded through the Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board. And she came on board to organize describe and arrange an institutional archive. And if you're unfamiliar with institutional archives, it's essentially an archive that documents your own history. So rather than kind of external history, this was a way for us to kind of take control of the organization's history, which, as Keith mentioned, we're entering our 77th year. We have entered our 77th year, but our records up to this point were just scattered all over the museum. And it made it very difficult when we celebrated our 75th anniversary a couple of years ago to really get a good sense of where we came from and how we've grown. And so Rachel was supposed to be with us through the end of the summer and then decided to turn it into her capstone project for her graduate program and ended up staying with us through December. And I don't know if anyone had the opportunity to hear her speak at all. She's amazing. She actually now works at Case while finishing up her grad program. And she was just really instrumental in getting these records organized and usable to the public. And so the goal is over time, we will continue to add to it and make sure that it's maintained not just for staff, but for the public as well. We also had our first experience working with a senior project student that extended beyond the senior project. So we were working with a student, Elliot Rendall, who had approached us about doing a presentation related to the intersection of fashion and history and women's suffrage. And I said, well, that's a cool idea for an exhibit. Do you want to expand it? And so Elliot spent the month of May, which is actually a very short amount of time to plan an exhibit, but spent the month of May working on an exhibit that was then on view at the Historical Society through the summer. And it was a really rewarding experience to work with a member of the community, a young member of the community, and go over with Elliot kind of what goes into an exhibit. You have to think about the themes, the content, what kind of photos do you use, things that you tend to not think of, like what kind of frames or like image usage and image rights, those details that go into exhibit planning. And Elliot had just a really great experience and also was able to talk about it in kind of like a behind the scenes kind of guided tour during our summer fundraiser, the Shaker Soiree. One of the things that I have been most excited about, because I'm really passionate about collections, is opening up Catalog It, which is our collections management system. And so I'm actually going to switch my screen. So let's see, share. So if you go to our website and go to Preserve Collections, we've spent the last 2 years adding items to Catalog It, which, as I mentioned, is a cloud-based collections management system, but it was not open to the public. And so we, in December, as part of our kind of goals to make our collections more accessible, which also align with our strategic plan and our goals for our Cuyahoga Arts and Culture Grant, is a way for members of the public to, I clicked it, but that's good because this is what I want to show you, is that you can now look through some items from our collection, which previously you would have had to email me and ask if we had something. And so right now it's really small. There's actually over 700 items in Catalog It on our end. But for what's available to the public right now, there's a little over 200. And so we hope to keep adding to that. Right now we're operating on this theory called more product, less process, which is basically, it's an archival theory, and Megan's smirking over here. The basic idea is that you get the basics in the system and then you add details later. So if you are searching through this, you might notice some items don't have as much information as others. Maybe you notice that something's incorrect. Please let me know, because I would love to add more context and more information to the items on here. And so it is viewable through our website, or you can click the link to the hub and search directly on here. So right now it's kind of separated by archives, artwork, clothing and textiles, furniture, maps, objects, and photographs, which photographs is the largest section represented right now because it's the easiest to digitize when you can put it on a scanner. But this is something, as I said, I've just been really excited about because collections inform so much of what we do in the community, whether it's walking tours, using photos from our collections, or exhibits that rely on items from our collection. This is something that I'm really excited to see grow. And hopefully we will continue to have more interns and grant-based projects that are kind of focused on this area. And then the last thing, let's go back to that other. The last thing that I wanted to mention is our continuing collaboration with the library and the city on Warrensville West Cemetery. And the photo in the top right corner, which I am just now realizing I'm wearing the exact same outfit, so excuse me. We were very fortunate to receive the State Historic Preservation Office's Public Education and Awareness Award for the work that we've done at the cemetery. And the cemetery project is honestly one of my favorite things that we kind of do at the museum. I just find cemeteries very fascinating. I'm one of those people that when I go on vacation, I Google where the local cemeteries are. And so it's just been a really rewarding experience to grow this. And the tours that we offer, we've offered at least one tour every year, always fill up very quickly because there's this real interest in the community. And the cemetery itself has had kind of a strange history in terms of bodies being added, and potentially at one point they were trying to get rid of the cemetery, but it's now a central part of the Lee Road corridor, which we're going to talk about later, that a lot of people don't realize is even there. It's tucked next to the Heinens parking lot. So if you have not been there, I recommend going or signing up for one of our tours. We usually offer it in the fall. And it's just, as I said, a really rewarding part of what we've been doing at the museum. So that's a really kind of broad overview of some of the things that we've done in terms of collections and exhibits. But I'm now going to turn it over to Kate Walker, our Operations and Events Manager, to talk a little bit more about education and programs. So Megan, if you could go to the next slide.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Walker. As Brianna noted, I am the Operations and Events Manager. I'm going to give a very high-level overview of the wonderful year we had in programming in 2023. From community outreach to educational programs, I want to thank every single person who participated in any of the programs that we put together. You know, your contribution and attendance and enthusiasm is really invaluable to our organization, and we appreciate every single one of you for being here today as one of our continued programs. So to kick it off, last year, we started a new and successful series, which we like to call a Mingle at the Mansion. These mingles have been a wonderful opportunity to engage the community and partner with vendors and other community stakeholders. For example, in April, we did a mingle where we partnered with Chef Douglas Katz and Stump, which is a local plant shop in the Van Aken district, for a fun play on a plant swap that engaged community interest and also allowed people to eat delectable snacks. So these mingles have just been a new way, and it exceeded expectations from the Sweetheart Edition to the Botanical Edition to the Hugie Edition. We're thrilled to see this program continue in 2024. It's just a new way to be a community space, not just necessarily exclusively a museum or a resource in that way. We're also so happy to report that this past year we saw the largest uptick in both school tours and rentals since COVID started, which was obviously a number of years ago at this point. So welcoming students from local private and public elementary schools in the area, all the way up through college classes at John Carroll University. and welcoming them to the museum, as well as renting for multiple groups of families to share important life events at the museum has been a true breath of fresh air. It's so nice to really start welcoming people back to the space for varied reasons outside of these specific exhibits or programming that we're putting on that people want to be included in the space as well. So we're really looking forward to expanding our rental availability as well as tours to continue to educate more young minds about local history. In the vein of our annual programs, we saw the 10th year of our Bike Shaker program, along with the 9th year of our Shaker Dig Camp, our 3rd Mother's Day Tea Party, and I was unable to determine how many Century House birthday parties we've had, but I think a lot.
Century worth.
Yeah, century worth of birthday parties. But as we are currently transitioning our educator role, we're looking to continue Bake Shaker in 2024. And we're also looking for a few changes and expansions to our camp programming, but that will be in 2025. We've heard a lot of feedback about how doing a more expansive full day program would be beneficial both to kids and to parents. And we're trying to reflect that in our curriculum for the camp program. So that's something that we're going to be working on this year to be executed in the following year. As well, the Mother's Day Tea Party saw the highest level of attendance yet. We actually were fully sold out. Well, it's not, you don't have to buy tickets, but we had a cap.
At capacity.
At capacity, exactly. And we look forward to continuing to celebrate families at all of their forms this year on May 11th. And every October, we celebrate Century Homes with the Century House birthday party at the Van Aken district. This year, we also had a record turnout to share resources from us as well as the City Library and Cleveland Restoration Society on how to take care of your home. It's a fun event and a wonderful way for us to be able to meet and engage with new families. We also had some lovely engaging programming, including a members-only tour of the ICA, a Horseshoe Lake hike with Roy Lyric, Community Scanning Day, researching family photos, and a Laura Meckler book talk. Some of these events had more success than others, but they all had valuable content, and we'd love to see more engagement and visibility for upcoming programs in 2024. Finally, our largest 2 events of the year are the Shaker Soiree and Apple Fest. Our 2nd annual soiree was a beautiful night. It had delicious food, it had wonderful cocktails, it had great music and dancing, and all of that with the hopes of fundraising for the Historical Society. So unfortunately, this past year, the ticket sales and sponsorships have dropped a bit from the first year, but we've already begun planning to make this year's soiree the best yet. So we really hope that all of you can join us on June 13th, July 13th, thanks guys, of this year. Let's see, where was I? And also for Apple Fest, we had a wonderful, if not chilly and quite a wet day, but we welcomed a lot of valuable local partners. It had fabulous food and drink. It saw some fun performances from a local dance studio, Studio J. So that is a lot of programming to cram into a year for a staff of only 3 people, but we really are passionate about being able to engage with our community. So we've been very intentional this year about partnering with a wide variety of local community partners, bless you, and sharing stories that reflect the community we represent. We're looking forward to taking these lessons we learned in 2023 and growing our outreach in 2024. And all of that is thanks to people like you participating. So thank you all very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our board treasurer, Bruce Cutler, to give us a little financial rundown for the past year.
Hey, I'm Bruce Cutler. I'm the new treasurer for the Shaker Heights Society. I came on board last spring, and we are just finalizing the year-end financial statements for the year 2023. And I can report that the operating performance of has remained constant over the last 3 years. There was a deficit in the operating performance, which is consistent, as I said, in the last 3 years. But with the added income realized from our non-operating activities, we're able to recognize a net asset, positive net asset in 2023. Performance in 2023 was aided by two payments received from the
Ohio History Connection.
Thank you very much. As I said, I'm still new and still trying to navigate through everything. And we got these payments due to the due diligence of Brianna and her staff, who were able to bring these in and keep our operating performance at a consistent level. Fundraising and program revenues have been fairly consistent with the previous year and could have actually been improved. We could have had improved results if the weather had cooperated a little bit better, specifically in Apple Fest. If anyone has any questions. Final comment, we are still navigating actually through a post-COVID era and ongoing challenges for us.
Before we move into our presentation, does anyone have any questions about kind of anything that's been mentioned, programming wise? Yes.
Do you share in the revenue from the latest tour?
So no. So are you asking, will we share it, or is it reflected in the numbers that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a almost sold out tour.
Yeah, so it wasn't
sponsored by you and the Nature Center.
Yeah, so it was a joint fundraiser. So we agreed to split the proceeds for 50-50. But that wasn't reflected in 2023. Yeah, right. So that's 2024. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Question for programming. I noticed that there was supposed to be a mingle at the mansion for trivia night, which I was very interested to participate. I was rounding up a team, but I noticed it got canceled, and I was told there wasn't enough signups. But is there a plan to hopefully do that again for 2024?
Yes, there is. So we were also really excited about that one. I think just the timing was a little weird on it, and we ended up canceling it just due to really low registration, which made it difficult to plan like food partners and stuff like that. That being said, like I'm a trivia person, and so I'm really excited about that one, and so we are planning on offering that this year. Yes.
I'm still forming my question, but it's essentially around formalized like strategic partnerships with the city. Curious like what your working relationship is currently, and maybe if there's thoughts for the near or distant future of more like mutually beneficial work together for financial benefit.
Yeah, so we up to this point, a lot of our relationship with the city has been kind of through the planning department. I guess I can only speak to since when I started. I'm not sure exactly what came before me, but working a lot with the planning department on programming, whether that's like the cemetery work, Century House birthday party, stuff like that. We trying to think what else, and Kate or Keith, someone can jump in if I'm like missing something right now. We did not receive financial support from the city. And I guess I'm just going to put this out there. We actually tried to last year attempted to do a bond issue, which would have been very unique for us. We would have been only the second museum in the state of Ohio to try to pass a municipal levy. But we had a lot of internal discussion about kind of out-of-the-box ways to fund nonprofits, especially a humanities nonprofit, in an environment that is kind of decreasing support for arts and humanities organizations. So it's something that we had kind of pursued in 2023, and it was not accepted by the city. So right now, going into 2024, it hasn't happened yet, but we are getting some financial support from the city on a short-term basis. So it's not something, it's not something that is guaranteed beyond 2024. It was included in their budget meetings in, I think that was December of 2023 when I went to the one budget meeting. So that is something that, as I said, we are now getting some support, but it's not guaranteed. And
Was it right there?
oh, sorry. Okay. And so that's just ongoing conversations that we're having with the city is just, if, you know, we've had conversations in terms of, we feel like there's something that we offer to the city in terms of our longevity and preserving the community's history in partnership with the library, because local history, I'm looking at Megan, is a significant part of this, and we partner a lot. But it's just, as I said, ongoing conversations about kind of where do we go from here? Because as Bruce said, we've been pretty stable for 3 years, but it's also, you know, wages are stagnant, kind of our operating budget is stagnant, and it's difficult to grow when we don't have alternatives. And so we're just exploring a variety of options.
Is that something that's very common? Like I'm thinking about like Bedford Historical Society. Do they have like a financial relationship? Curious how other historical.
Yeah, so I can't speak to Bedford, but I actually have 2 friends who are directors of small historical societies in Northeast Ohio, and they do not get funding from their cities. So they're entirely funded through grants and, you know, the same way we are. So like grants, programs, we are fortunate to have an investment account that we draw from to support operations. They also have, well, the one organization has more staff members than we do, and they've been able to grow a little bit. They have been, I mean, I'll just say this, that their director is just like a wizard when it comes to grant writing. And so has been able to get very large grants that they have the capacity to support, that then fund staff, which we have not gotten to yet. I would love to, but we're just not there yet because there's a lot that goes into those larger grants in terms of like a 50% grant match and stuff like that, which then makes it difficult. Yeah.
Can I just
Yeah, and
piggyback
Kate
that?
looks like she wanted to add something too.
So through my research, I did find out that I believe the Chagrin Falls Historical Society gets significant funding from the city, which obviously helps, you know, stabilize things. And then to your first question, up until recently, I think the city and city council mayor appreciated the fact that the Historical Society was here and was a repository as well as with the Library of Local History. But that was kind of, they were happy that we were here, but they didn't necessarily want to support us financially. And I think we've now turned a corner. And I think a lot of it had to do with the proposed municipal tax levy that we had thought we could put together. And also our most recent strategic plan, which really incorporated so much more than, as Brianna said, early white Shaker settlers. And now we're trying to broaden that. And I think the city has appreciated that we're doing that. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, expand on that a little bit. We do have a really, I think, excellent relationship with the city outside of the planning department. We've done partnerships with their director of DEI. We also have a lot of relationships within the community department or the communications department where they will share information and like vice versa. We also, like, we're planning a series with the recreation department. So there's a lot of obvious overlap, but you know, like I was kind of mentioning at the end of like my programming discussion, like the idea of being intentional, like we want to reflect the community that we're representing. And to do that, we really have to just be a community stakeholder. And a lot of that means these partnerships, working with the library, working with the government, you know, these other, you know, foundational entities for a city. If we want to be viewed as that, that's like core to the identity that we have. We've overturned the past couple of years. So that's really one of, I think Brianna and I, as we talk about frequently, like one of our main goals to continue to grow those relationships so that, you know, we work with them, but they also see value in us and vice versa. So they actually think of us like, oh, hey, like we're doing this, and maybe the Historical Society would be interested in that, whereas in the past, like we maybe hadn't been considered. So I think that there's a lot of value there, but it's a I think overall a really good relationship.
One last thing that I forgot to mention while I was talking about exhibits is that our next exhibit is opening March 8th. Fingers crossed, because there's just a lot going into it, but it's called Manifestation of Light. And it's inspired by the upcoming solar eclipse and is focusing on how, I know we just said we try to not focus on the Shakers, but this was a really unique opportunity to talk about how the Shakers used celestial imagery in their worship, writing, and artwork. And so, as I mentioned, that opens March 8th. We actually had gotten a grant to fund a research assistant for this, who has since been kind of promoted to curator because she's so great. And it's just really, I think it's going to be really interesting. And so if that sounds interesting, hope to see you March 8th between 6 and 8 p.m. And I also wanted to just note, because I'm looking at her, and so I'm thinking of it right now, but that we do get support from Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, and that is funded through, it's through the county, and so a lot of arts organizations are able to apply for it, and we've received CAC funding, I want to say since 2010, if not sooner or earlier. So we have been grant recipients for a long time, and it has been a really kind of steady source of income for us. It doesn't pay our whole budget, but it's something that we, as long as we do the reporting and everything, we can, it's something that really helps us as a small organization that focuses on the humanities and arts.
So if you smoke, thank you for smoking, because that's what funds it. But please quit.
I didn't want to call it the sin tax, but
please quit.
Yeah. Yes.
You didn't really talk much about your interface with the school district, and do you get any financial support from them?
So we don't get any support outside of charging for tours. And that's something that we are hoping to grow that relationship. It's very hard to convince, especially now when, the Shaker school system just put the large levy on the ballot, to kind of say, hey, you should just give us money too. And so kind of our priority has been for the past couple of years, as we've been, everyone is figuring out what does school look like after kids are back in school, after they've been out of school for a couple of years. Our priority has been just reestablishing relationships with teachers and students. And that's easier said than done because teachers are still figuring out what it looks like. And so as Kate mentioned, we've had a lot more success this year, like the 2023-2024 school year, with getting students, like K through 12 students, at the museum or requests for our staff to go to the schools. And so right now, our priority is just growing those relationships and eventually getting to a point where we can clearly demonstrate our value to the schools, like active value, because students are coming, they're enjoying it, the teachers value it, and then maybe transitioning to conversations about long-term or more broad funding. But right now, as I said, it's more just we charge for any group tour, regardless of whether it's the schools or, a local assisted living place that wants to bring a group. So that's the only source of income coming from the schools right now.
Well, I remember when I was in junior high school, and our history teacher talked about approaching history, and she said, sort of like dropping a rock into a pond. First of all, you talk about local history, you talk about state history, then you talk about national history, you sort of expand the discussion. And it seems to me that, you offer so many resources for possibly formal education for these kids that, you should receive some sort of, like be a part-time faculty member of the school district or some such thing that could really strengthen your economic base.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they think back, they're like, I remember going to the Shaker Historical Society in 4th grade. I think it was 4th grade. It's like, that's when you were doing your local history unit and everyone was coming through the schools. My understanding is that when the schools switched over to the IB program, that stopped happening. And so it was a big shift because the teachers were no longer bringing their students to the schools. We would occasionally, just based on records I've seen, get requests for our Museum in a Box program, which we are working to update. But it's just been a very big shift with the schools changing. And that's kind of where we've started to find our sweet spot. Is we found a particular IB unit that works really well with what we can offer. And that I think is going to be kind of it has been our foot in the door. And so we have goals of meeting, essentially trying to get every IB class through, like third grade IB class through the museum. That is, I mean, I want to also note that, you know, we would love to expand beyond IB because there are a lot of students in the Shaker schools who are not in the IB program. But right now that kind of seems, as I said, to be like our foot in the door and our entry point. And so we're gonna take it if we can get it.
You know, when I was in elementary school, the Shaker Historical Society was in this building. And we would come from the other schools to Moreland School to visit the Shaker Historical Society.
Yeah.
So there is a precedent for support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before we moved into our current location, we were in a rented storefront, but before that, we were in schools. We kept getting kicked out of the schools as enrollment grew, but still, we were always in a school. And so, yeah, it's just an interesting piece of our history, and then an interesting piece that we're navigating now, especially as I said, post-pandemic, when a lot of teachers were kind of felt like I have no time for extras because I'm just trying to get the basics.
We do have a board member who's a member.
Yes, we do. So we do, yeah, we have a board member who's a teacher at the high school.
I can just quickly say, as a former trustee and an IB parent, Shaker school system, once they went K through 12 IB, that's where the problem specifically came. But the fact that if you can get into that IB and find a way to do that, I will tell you the teachers able to have that piece that was in the third grade again. And I know that the parents do too. And yeah, and all the third graders are IB. So the fact that you have found that little in, and if you can show the teachers and even the school that that's an availability to be able to get them to come back in, because it was even once they went to that, even to go to the concerts that they used to go to, or even go to the art museum, or even have art to go from CMA coming back to them, they couldn't do it anymore unless you could find a way to show that it could be part of that IB thing. So as long as you found that, that is what you've said, that is your in.
Yeah.
And that can probably get, I think, what the community would like to see again. I really do. And I know the teachers wanted to, so.
Yeah, I actually felt like this was probably the most glowing review we could get was after we did the first IB tour in, I'm trying to think if it was November or December. Our educator at the time, Julie Kaufman, who now works for the city of Cleveland Heights, but she reached out and just asked for feedback. We're new at this. Can you give any feedback? And the teacher said that while they always enjoy field trips because the students get out of the classroom, they rarely have field trips that align so well with what they're learning. And so, that was intentional. Julie put a lot of time and effort into tailoring the activities and the content towards the IB unit. But I just think that really made me feel like there was like hope, like, oh, well, if you think that, maybe other teachers will think that too.
Even going, but I will tell you with IB, you have to do that because IB is governed by their body. And so even though once the school has picked that program, everything they do is governed now by the IB body, but then they also have to fit it in with the state educational guidelines. So the fact that she was able to do that, that's perfect because there's so many things they want to do and people don't take the time to do that, or they can't. And then they can't have them participate in it. So I think that's great. That was good feedback.
I'm really excited about looking at your archives online.
Yes.
And I guess what I'm wondering is how do you and the library share archives or overlap? Like if we're doing some research, how do we know?
Well, we communicate with each other all the time, and we often pass patrons back, people who are looking for things, we'll pass them on to the other person, wherever they start. And we do have a little bit of overlap. And in the local history collection here at the library was founded as a way to make the Shaker Historical Society collection and materials at the city and materials elsewhere in the community more available. So we did acquire some of the Historical Society's collection founded in the 90s. But essentially, we are different collections with different strengths, and we always recommend you go to both, or at least communicate with both of us, so we can correct your.
I will say anything that is on Catalog It, that is our collections management system. Like that's how we are now managing our collections. So if it's on Catalog It, it's at the Shaker Historical Society. Cleveland Memory is a little iffier because that one is just called like the Shaker Heights Collection, and that has a little bit of both. That predates like me, so I'm not even, sometimes I get confused like what on there is at the library versus us.
The mouse is yours and the rest is us.
It's some maps. There are maps that are from us. But I mean, it'll say the repository in the entry. But like I said, this catalog is really intended for a way for us to manage our collection, like make sure everything's accounted for. If something's used in an exhibit or moved, we can note that on our end. But it's also then a way for the community to search our collection. So of interest to you, which I have actually been meaning to email you, I had recently digitized some photos of Lower Lake. So
I just saw that. I've never seen that photo of Lower Lake.
Yeah. So yes. And sometimes the information, like we have zero context. It has no accession number. So we have no idea when it was brought into the collection. There's no information about it. And so that's why I had noted, if you're digging through this and you're like, hey, I recognize that person, or I don't know, my uncle took that photo, like please reach out to me, because any context we can provide is very helpful. So we're gonna now move into our presentation with Kara and myself, a dynamic community, the history and future of the Lee Road Corridor. And I just wanna, so even though I've been talking for a while, just to give a little information about my background. So I hold a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Rochester Institute of Technology. So my background's actually in art. I thought I was gonna work in an art museum, and then got a Master of Library and Information Science and ended up doing a bunch of unpaid internships at different historical societies or history-based museums, and then ended up joining the Ohio Ohio History Service Corps, which is an AmeriCorps program that focuses on capacity building for history-based organizations in Ohio. And through that experience, I worked with 12 different historical-based organizations, many of them very tiny. And so when the executive director job came up for this community, I wanted to move to the Cleveland area. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. I applied for it and I got the job. So I've been here. I just celebrated my 4th anniversary at the end of January. It's crazy that this is now my 5th year here. And then speaking after me is Kara Hamley O'Donnell. And Kara holds a Bachelor of Environmental Design from Miami University School of Architecture and a Master of Arts in Historic Preservation Planning from Cornell University. And before becoming the principal planner for the city of Shaker Heights, she was the historic preservation planner / city planner for the city of Cleveland Heights for 25 years. And she's going to be sharing today the future of the Lee Road Corridor through the Lee Road Action Plan. And I want to note that after I present, she's going to jump right in, but there will be time for questions at the very end. And the Lee Road Corridor has a very, very rich, complex history that cannot be covered in 30 minutes. So if there's things that you're like, oh, she didn't mention this, I just didn't have time to fit it all. So bear with me. I honestly, doing research for this, I was like, you could have like 7 different exhibits and like dissertations grow out of this. So it's just a very complicated history, interesting history. Okay, so we're starting with Warrensville Township. We're going all the way back. So Warrensville Township was designated as Township 7 in Range 11 in Moses Cleveland's Survey of the Western Reserve. And we start with the story of Daniel and Margaret Warren. Like many with the Connecticut Western Reserve, we saw people from New England coming to settle unsettled lands in Northeast Ohio, or Ohio in general. So Daniel and Margaret moved from Ackworth, New Hampshire in 1808. They first stopped in Painesville and then bartered Daniel's labor for forested land in the heights above Cleveland. And they were the first permanent white settlers in the township after building their log cabin around 1810 in Lot 42. And you can see that little red circle, that is the intersection that they built their cabin at. It would be present day northwest corner of the Sugar and Lee intersection. And at the time, Lee Road, before it became Lee Road, was a north-south surveyor's trail. So that's one of the reasons that they settled there. And I'm sure you figured this out by now. It was called Warrensville Township after Daniel and Margaret Warren. Their 2-year-old daughter, Lovisa, died in 1811, and she was buried on a hill east of their cabin. And that was what is considered the first burial in what became Warrensville West Cemetery, followed by the burial of Lovisa's aunt, Betsy Prentice, in 1812, which is technically the first recorded burial in the cemetery. And when Asa Stiles, who's noted on this map as Asa Stites, that's wrong, it's Stiles, when he bought lot 43, he transferred the land where Lovisa and Betsy were buried to the township to be used as a cemetery. And Asa and his wife Rebecca were both buried in the cemetery. So New Englanders continued to arrive in the Western Reserve in the early 1800s. In 1913, early settlers petitioned the newly formed Cuyahoga County to lay a road along that north-south surveyor's trail. And because farmer Elias Lee donated a substantial portion of his land for the road, it was named Lee Road. So a lot of people think it was named after Mother Ann Lee, associated with the Shaker religious community, but it was not. It was named after a farmer who donated a lot of land. Oh yes, they're supposed to be 18. I am so sorry. Yeah, those are all 18s. The first log cabin school was built on Asa Stiles' property in 1815, not 1915. And at the time, it was not a co-ed school. So boys were taught in September through April, and then girls were taught May through August. So girls got the short end of the stick in terms of their schooling. In the late 1820s, there was a big arrival of Manx immigrants, people from the Isle of Man, arriving in Warrensville Township, and they settled along Lee Road. And I circled 2 names on here that were common Manx names. If you look at a wider map, you can see Manx names along Lee Road and kind of in that general area. So Corla and Neil were 2 of the pretty prominent Manx families at the time. And the Warren homestead that was located at, again, the northwest intersection of Lee and Chagrin, then was used as a stagecoach inn for traffic along Lee and Kinsman. And so one of the, I think it's a very cool item in our collection, is the D. Warren sign, which was donated by one of Daniel Warren's descendants, and according to her, was the sign that was used at the stagecoach inn. And at this time, the North Union Shaker Village was being established. It was formally established in 1822 to the north, and that provided an opportunity for industry and trade with the Shakers, who were known for honesty and high quality goods. So Warrensville reached the peak population of around 1,500 by 1860. Okay, I have the 1800 right here. And the Lee Road corridor at this time was still mostly farmland. So there was a 1-room brick schoolhouse added on Lee Road in the 1860s across from Warrensville West Cemetery, and a wooden addition was constructed at a later date, but I haven't really been able to find exactly when. And this is the school in the bottom middle. You can see the brick portion on the right side and the wood portion on the left side. And then in the map, the schoolhouse is right across from the graveyard or the cemetery. And this school was known as the Hornet's Nest. And from what I was able to find from just anecdotal stories, 2 miles south, there was another school at Lee Miles that was called the Beehive. And they got their name because the students were known for fistfights and spelling bee rivalries between students. And so one became the Hornet's Nest, one became the Beehive. That was according to Celine Corlett. It was recounted in the Journal, one of our newsletters. And then the Gillette Tavern operated at the northeast corner of the Chagrin-Lee intersection. And this is a photo of the tavern. This would have been after it was the Gillette Tavern. And there's conflicting information about whether Father Gillette or son Gillette founded the tavern. They were both named Alonzo, so it makes it very difficult to kind of fully tell. But some of our records note that it was established in 1867, and other records note it was established around 1880. And Alonzo, the son, was at the very least most likely operating it by 1880 because his occupation was listed as innkeeper in the 1880 census. But he ended up dying in 1888. And the time period after, like directly after that, it's a little muddled as to who was kind of operating it. But the population of Warrensville Township kind of started dwindling after 1860 as Cleveland's population grew, and the city of Cleveland began expanding through annexation. So around the turn of the century, there was continued expansion near Sugar and Lee in terms of construction and buildings, and you can see up in the map that there's like a few more structures that show up. The school is still across from the cemetery, and the text is going vertically, but it says like Gillette House for that yellow structure that's at the corner near the cemetery. And the 1870s and 1880s saw a wave of Eastern European immigrants, particularly Eastern European Jews, and many of them settled on the western edge of Warrensville Township in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later because that is very significant to the history of Shaker Heights. And there were two notable German immigrants, the Litzels and the Kubaks, who also moved and settled in this area during this time. So Christian Friedrich Kubak, who was known as Fred, he ended up purchasing the Gillette land from Alonzo's widow in 1901. And his occupation in the 1900 census was saloon keeper. So it's very obvious that he and his wife Amelia were the ones running it at that time.
You're talking about the space that is now the UH urgent care.
Yes, yeah. And then there was Johannes Litzel, known as John, and his wife Louisa had a farmstead at the Lee Van Aken intersection where City Hall now stands. One of their daughters, Mary Litzel, was a lifelong teacher who started at the Hornets Nest School, and she's actually pictured on the right in this photo. The next slide is a bigger image, so I'm going to get to that in a second. And their son, John G. Litzel, was later an agent for the Van Swearingen Company. And in the late 1890s and early 1900s, there was growing concern about annexation by the city of Cleveland, which just kept expanding. So this is a larger version of that photo. I think it's really interesting because you might notice that 4 of the 30 children are Black. And that I started looking at census records because I found this really interesting. And in the 1880 census, I should also note that it says 1893 on here. I don't know if this is completely accurate. I don't know who wrote that, but let's just assume this photo is from 1893. 1890 censuses are not available because they burned. So it's really difficult to accurately gauge kind of the 20-year period between 1880 and 1900. But in the 1880 census, there were 0 residents in Warrensville Township who were listed as Black. And in 1900 census, there were 19 residents. So even though it's a relatively small number, when you think of kind of the later history of Shaker Heights and restrictive covenants, the 19 residents is actually kind of significant. And when I started doing a little more digging, there was the Johnson family. They were a Black family who rented a home near the Hornets Nest School. And of their 8 children listed on the 1900 census, 3 of them would have been of school age in 1893. So even though we can't say definitively, I'd like to think that some of these children might be the Johnson children. And it's just a really kind of cool potential matchup between census records and then this photograph. And then we get into Eastview Village. So this is a map from a plat book from 1914. So Eastview Village was incorporated in 1906 by residents of Warrensville Township, who they had said that they wanted to improve municipal services and give residents greater control over education. But certainly the fear of annexation by Cleveland played a role in their decision to incorporate. And under the Beale Law, which was enacted in 1902 in Ohio, residents voted, Eastview residents voted in 1907 to prohibit alcohol sales, which may be why the Gillette Tavern, which at this point was run by Fred and Amelia Kubach, transitioned to a general store. Because it's funny because this photo, I added this again because this was likely the Kubach family that is pictured. At least, there's 3 men, so I'm not sure which one might be Fred, but his wife Amelia, they had 2 daughters and there's 2 younger girls in here. So again, can't say definitively, but I'd like to think that that might be Fred, Amelia, and their daughters Priska and Louisa.
Bohemian model beer.
This photo is from 1905, so they hadn't yet voted. So yeah, so at the time, again, his occupation was listed as saloon keeper. So at one point he was definitely serving alcohol. But I would be very curious whether he maybe still did past 1907, but the village decided to become a dry village, and they actually voted to remain dry through 1919. And then at this time, with a growing population in Eastview, they built a new 2-story 4-room schoolhouse behind the Hornets Nest School in 1910. And so you can see the Hornets Nest School in the foreground and then what was known as Eastview School in the background. And some Plain Dealer articles from 1911 note Eastview's attempt to fully secede from the township to become Eastview Township. And even though there are some articles about this attempt, I couldn't find any articles that actually give us like an answer. But based on the articles that came before, this attempt was most likely blocked because Eastview held both the township's cemetery and the township's town hall. So losing that would have been very detrimental to the township. And at the time, the town hall was located at Warrensville Center, Chagrin. So I'm a very visual person and I wanted to kind of better understand what the boundaries of Eastview were. So I made a composite image based on 2 plat books. So one was from 1912, one was from 1914. And so basically from kind of Lee Road to the west is the 1912 plat book and Lee Road to the east is the 1914 plat book. The scales were off, so it doesn't match up perfectly. But you can see like the pink boundary or red boundary that was surrounding Eastview Village. And this section that's circled in red was sold to the Van Swearingens in 1911. And so I'm a little unclear as to whether in 1912 it would have already been a part of Shaker Heights or if it was just the Van Swearingens developing Eastview. And the other thing I wanted to note is that I just noticed that the Scottsdale, the E decided to jump to another line. So anyways, there were some formatting issues when I moved it to PowerPoint, but I've seen several references to the southern border being Harvard Road, but I was not able to find any maps that show Eastview extending that far south. So this is just what I stuck with for now. And then I also overlaid a map of the Shaker Heights neighborhoods to get a sense of like truly how much of what we now know of Shaker Heights was encompassed by Eastview Village. So basically, the exception are the most northern neighborhoods. But otherwise, Eastview covered a lot of the neighborhoods, especially the neighborhoods that were voluntarily integrated in the 60s and that we now know to be some of the most diverse community or neighborhoods in the community. So the Van Swearingen Company incorporated Shaker Heights in 1912, and Eastview Village came to rely on Shaker Heights resources. So even though they had Eastview School to send their children to, Eastview only went up to 8th grade. So residents paid tuition to send their students to Shaker Heights High School. And they also contracted Shaker Heights for police and fire protection. And it's important to remember that during this time when Shaker Heights was incorporated, that the Van Swearingen Company controlled sales in Shaker Heights with intentional exclusion of Blacks, Catholics, and Jews, which kept Shaker Heights largely white Protestant. And as I said, I think it's important to bring up because we just saw the photograph that had 4 Black students. And so that is something that you probably would not have seen in Shaker Heights schools at that time. And just to get a sense of kind of how, these don't quite match up because both of these in our collection, this section from a program and this photograph are both identified as being from the 8th grade graduation. But you can see that there are way more students in this photo than there are listed in the graduating class. So I have a feeling that this is probably all of the students celebrating the 8th grade graduating class. But I just love this photo because it gives a nice sense of like the architecture of the school and also a sense of just how small kind of the class sizes were. And many of these names were children of early settlers. So Corlett, that was one of the Manx immigrants. Dempsey and Gibbs were also very important to the founding of Warrensville Township. And I should know this, but I want to say Samuel Gibbs, Helen's father, was the first mayor of Eastview Village. But that's escaping me right now. And then a 1915 appraisal that was in the Plain Dealer, which is on the bottom left, noted that Cleveland Heights and Eastview Village land grew in value more than any other area. So during this time period in kind of the 19-teens, the Van Swearingens, both the company and the brothers, were purchasing land in Eastview while Cleveland was annexing portions on the western edge. And as I kind of mentioned earlier with John G. Litzel, many sons of early township settlers were working as sales agents for the Van Swearingen Company to buy land in Eastview. Going back to the map, again, I'm a visual person. All of the areas that are circled in red is land that is either has been purchased by the Van Swearingen Company or the Van Swearingen brothers. And then that blue circle is the one I mentioned earlier that had definitely been purchased and developed by the Van Swearingens around 1911. And then I found a map of Cleveland annexation on Wikipedia that I thought was really interesting and decided to overlay it with this map as well. And so the portion marked LL was annexed by Cleveland in 1914. RR was annexed by Cleveland in 1917, and then the little sliver SS along Kinsman, now Sugarin, was annexed by Cleveland in 1919. So then we're kind of starting to see the boundaries of modern Shaker Heights form. Oh, and then the illustration at the top, when we think of kind of like duplexes in Shaker Heights, Winslow Road tends to be the first thing that comes to mind because it kind of became famous for it. But before Winslow Road, the Van Swearingens were diversifying their housing stock in the Milverton subdivision in Eastview, which is located in today's North Moreland neighborhood. And according to the article that accompanied this illustration from 1917, 25 different designs were created by architect A.E. Keller to align with, quote, the exclusive restrictions guarding the development of Shaker Heights Village, unquote. And so this was definitely visible. The Van Swearingen need for control is visible in the sense that, okay, yes, they're diversifying the housing stock, but they still want it to align with their aesthetic views and kind of fit the general formula that other neighborhoods in Shaker Heights were following. So a referendum concerning annexation of Eastview Village by Shaker Heights passed in 1919. By this point, Eastview Village was kind of struggling financially. They were relying on a lot of outside cities or governments for services, and it just kind of became too expensive. By 1922, which is when this map was created, the Van Swearingens had numerous streets and available plots laid out in the Moreland, Fernway, Lomond, and Sussex neighborhoods. But you might notice that South Moreland is still relatively untouched by the Van Swearingens. And it was around this time, so this was 1922, 3 years later, 1925, was when the Van Swearingen Company pressured owners to add what became known as Restriction Number 5 to their deeds, which required written consent from the company for sales or transfers or majority approval from 21 adjacent lots. And this was, of course, meant to be exclusionary and keep houses among people who the Van Swearingens deemed appropriate, aka white Protestants. So Shaker Heights saw a tremendous amount of growth in the 1920s after completion of the rapid transit lines. And the Eastview School could not handle the growing population. So what was then known as the Lee Moreland School was built in 1926. And this photo on the bottom left, you can see a pretty sparse landscape with Moreland School, and then Eastview School is kind of cut off on the left edge. But Eastview School was used as an administrative building and then later as a warehouse for the school. There was also a need for apartments and business districts. So the Van Swearingens built the Kingsbury building in 1926 to 1927, and it followed the same kind of design standards of residential construction. So Walker and Weeks designed this Tudor style building, and it was similar to what was being built in Shaker Square to the west. And they also placed a rapid stop close to this, and it was kind of the rapid station going here away from the wealthier neighborhoods to the north. Of course, there was a rapid line to the north. And then this building housed businesses, offices, and apartments, and was kind of the first mixed-use building in Shaker Heights. And then in 1929, German immigrant Joseph Heinen opened a small meat market at the northeast corner of Chagrin and Lee. And this photograph is from 1943, so later than the founding, but obviously Heinen's would go on to have a tremendous impact, not just in Shaker Heights, but in the region. And then further south, the land that was not purchased by the Van Swearingens in South Moreland, that the kind of empty looking area we saw on that Shaker Heights map, that was quickly developed by other people and other companies without the Van Swearingen deed restrictions or architectural standards. And because of this, that's why we start seeing American four squares, bungalows, Cleveland doubles, and other smaller single family houses for middle and working class families. And you still see it today, and it definitely sets the Moreland neighborhood apart from the rest of Shaker Heights in terms of the architectural styles and the housing stock. So this is a 1930 aerial view of the Chagrin-Lee Van Aken area. This is in the collection of the Shaker Heights Public Library. But this must have been, there wasn't a date listed, but it must have been after 1930 because you can see City Hall up in the corner. But you start to notice you have Moreland School, you have Eastview School, the Kingsbury building, the cemetery, and then there are commercial structures on the north side of Chagrin. But Moreland and the Moreland area still remains largely kind of undeveloped. You do see some houses and what looks like commercial buildings in the bottom left corner. And the Kenyon, like where Kenyon cuts into the intersection, is still relatively untouched. This is a zoning map from 1927. And the lots along the Lee Road corridor and along Chagrin had been rezoned for retail. And this also dramatically set the Moreland neighborhood apart from other Shaker Heights neighborhoods that did not have that same level of retail or any retail. And we're going to get to that a little bit later. So then this is another photo from 1951. As I mentioned, the other aerial view was at least 1930, but this is 1951, and we can already see increased commercial development on both sides of Chagrin. Yeah, no, it seemed like people wanted to look at the aerial view, so I was giving you a chance.
The second story, is that the along Chagrin, is that the bowling alley for people?
It's a bowling alley.
Yeah, we just discovered we have the plans for the bowling alley.
Oh, great.
In the microfilm. Patrice, she just digitized them.
Kisman, Lee Lanes.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Ready, go.
Okay. So in like the 1920s, Moreland was very much a changing neighborhood. So as I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of Eastern European immigrants, especially Eastern European Jews that were settling west of Shaker Heights in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. And this had an impact on the Moreland neighborhood. So the Lee Scottsdale building was built in 1929 to 1930 for the first Catholic Slovak Ladies Association. It was designed by Fox, okay, Kara, you're gonna have to correct me if I'm saying this wrong, Fox, Duthie, and Foose?
Yes.
Okay. Which was an architectural firm. And it included retail units on the first floor, an auditorium, and apartments on the upper floors. So it was another example of kind of mixed use building in this area. And it served as the first Catholic Slovak Ladies Association headquarters until 1968, and then continued as a mixed use building, including housing the Dance Cleveland studio in the 1970s. So as middle and working class Jewish residents of Mount Pleasant look to move further east, affordable housing and discriminatory real estate practices kind of steered them to the Moreland and Lomond neighborhoods. So Moreland was predominantly Jewish in the 1940s and 1950s, and a 1958 study estimated that Moreland School was 70% Jewish. And Temple Bethel on Chagrin, which is now the Buckeye State Credit Union, was the first synagogue in Shaker Heights and opened in 1957. And there's a photo of it in the center. Lee Scottsdale on the left, Temple Bethel on the center. And there was a additional retail space along Lee that became a drama center run by the Jewish Community Center. And that was sold and dedicated as the Shaker Lee Synagogue in 1961. And as the automotive industry and national highway system grew in the 1950s after World War II, Lee Road south of Chagrin, which if you remember was zoned pretty much entirely for commercial buildings, became a popular stretch for car dealerships. And so I picked this photo. There are a few photos I could have chosen, but I picked Zalud. I'm saying that right? Zalud, okay. Zalud Oldsmobile, because this is the building that we now know as the dealership in Shaker Heights. So kind of the co-working office space. That's what it used to look like. Some of you might remember it. And then something that was notable around this time is Shaker Heights trying to set itself apart from neighboring communities. So after a series of crimes on Kinsman to the west in 1959, the city of Shaker Heights decided to change the name of the street to Chagrin Boulevard when it goes through Shaker Heights to kind of separate it from the city of Cleveland. And around the same time, 1959, Mayor Stapleton proposed barricades on side streets to cut access from Cleveland, but that proposal was defeated at that time. So as Jewish residents moved further east in the 1960s, it really opened up opportunities for Black families to move into the Moreland neighborhood. And Shaker Heights had already seen this happening in the Ludlow community, and the Moreland Community Association was formed in 1962, 5 years after the Ludlow Community Association, in order to stabilize integration in the area. And one of the things, the Moreland Community Association was incredibly active. I can't list everything that they worked on here, but in 1964, they successfully petitioned the city to develop Chelton Park for the neighborhood after development reduced green space and community recreation areas in the Moreland neighborhood. But the Moreland neighborhood also experienced physical challenges. So as families were leaving the neighborhood, there were a lot of vacant and or aging residential and commercial buildings. There was pressure from auto dealers for bigger signs and brighter lights, which residents did not want. And a lot of these zoning changes were successfully defeated by the Moreland Community Association. And they also successfully convinced the city to clean up a dump behind one of the car dealerships. But because of kind of all of this quote unquote blight, as the city saw it happening in the Moreland neighborhood, they hired, and I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, Steich? Anyone know? Okay. Steich Hisaka, Leonard Steich and Don Hisaka were two architects who were hired to develop or to create a redevelopment plan that was then released in 1967. And the Steich Hisaka plan was typical of mid-century urban renewal plans that addressed quote unquote blight by eliminating what was deemed substandard housing. So the plan called for, and this, I guess I should note, this is a page from the plan, which has been digitized and is available on Cleveland Memory if you're interested in kind of looking through it. But this is the bottom section is kind of what we think of being the heart of the Moreland neighborhood. And so the plan called for destroying 54 homes and building a civic center, which is that. Oh yeah, I do. Okay, I think this is what the civic center was going to be. So you can see it's kind of directly in the community. There's going to be a civic center, a service center, and luxury high-rise apartment buildings. And there was a very negative community reaction. It was seen by many as a way to displace Black residents and eliminate affordable housing in the city of Shaker Heights. So the city ended up dropping plans for the civic center and the high-rise apartments, but moved forward with the service center, which is still located on Chagrin. And it was highly controversial because a lot of residents saw the implication of locating the service center in the least affluent majority Black neighborhood in Shaker Heights. But the Moreland Community Association, unable to stop the building of the service center, successfully prevented kind of major negative impacts. So they ensured that the service center would be screened from residents and that there would be no odors, because the concern was, why are you dumping garbage in my neighborhood? And so they did successfully stop that, but there are a lot of residents from the time and that are quoted in different sources kind of saying, well, would the neighborhoods to the north want garbage in their communities, or, stuff like that. So it was and I think still is a pretty controversial addition to the Moreland neighborhood. And then while the Moreland neighborhood was grappling with integration, white flight, and urban renewal, the wealthier white neighborhoods to the north were fighting the Clark Freeway, which was proposed to run east-west through the Shaker Parklands. And while it wasn't strictly just Shaker Heights, this was very much a group effort, their actions with the Clark Freeway also stopped the building of the Lee Freeway, which was a north-south running freeway that would have run basically through all of the Shaker Heights neighborhoods west of Lee Road. And so you can see on this center diagram, so this line here, the thin line is Lee Road, and this is the proposed Lee Freeway. So the work of all of the groups that came together to fight the Clark Lee Freeway really had an impact on the southern neighborhoods, because otherwise there would be a freeway through there, which was very common for the time period for there to be freeways that blocked access to Black communities. I used to live in Akron, and there was a highway in Akron that was built that completely separated a Black neighborhood from downtown and dramatically changed the way that community was able to sustain itself. And so all of those stories throughout the country during this time have lasting effects today. And so the fact that these freeways were not built in Shaker Heights, I think really changed the trajectory of what could have been. And despite best efforts to integrate Moreland, by 1970, the neighborhood and school were predominantly Black. So to promote integration in the schools, there was a voluntary busing program known as the Shaker Schools Plan. And this involved Moreland students being volunteered by their parents to be bused to predominantly white schools, and then white students in predominantly white schools to be bused to Moreland. And then later, Ludlow and Lomond schools were added to this. I do want to note that the initial plan only called for one-way busing of Moreland students to white schools, and the Moreland residents were understandably very upset with that. And so it eventually came to parents kind of on both sides agreeing that this would only work if it was collaborative and students were being bused both ways. In 1976, temporary barricades were placed on 6 streets in the Lomond neighborhood, including one at Scottsdale and Lee, as traffic diverting measures. And this was seen by neighboring Clevelanders as motivated by both racism and classism, essentially intending to keep out working class Black residents of the Lee Harvard neighborhood. And two of the barricades became permanent in 1979, only 3 years after the temporary barricades were put up. And in 1990, there was a banner by a Cleveland councilman put up that read, "Entering Apartheid Shaker, Home of the Barricades." And this banner that is visible in the bottom left was up for a year. And to this day, it remains a complex situation. We've done a few bike shaker tours that talk about inclusion and exclusion in Shaker Heights, and we stop at the barricades, and we almost always get people who think that they're awful and people who live in the neighborhood who like that cars don't speed down their street. And so it really is kind of an interesting situation because you do have some people who think that their streets are safer because of the barricades, but that perception that it was essentially to keep out Clevelanders, I think still persists to this day. Decline in student enrollment and de facto segregation in the schools led to school reorganization that ended up closing 4 of 9 neighborhood schools in 1987. And this included Moreland, Ludlow, and Sussex, which at the time were predominantly Black neighborhoods in Shaker Heights. And the reorganization increased integration in the schools, but did have a negative impact in that these neighborhoods lost the culture that was associated with having a neighborhood school, such as being able to walk home from lunch, being able to walk to parent-teacher conferences, things like that. And in 1993, Moreland School, because the community at least recognized the historical significance of the school, became the main branch of the Shaker Heights Public Library. It's where we are right now. If you didn't know, we're standing in Moreland School. Ta-da! Big reveal. But during this time, the city felt the need to address integration among businesses as well, fearing that a disproportionate number of Black shoppers would destabilize the area. So there were efforts to get white shoppers in Chagrin-Lee-Avalon, such as a program called Be a Shaker Shopper. And this is a map from our collection that they would hand out directories to make it easier to navigate the different businesses. And the city wanted to eliminate Black-focused businesses, and they actually purchased and demolished a theater that was located at Chagrin-Lee in the late 1970s when it was screening predominantly films for a largely Black audience. And studies on the Chagrin-Lee-Avalon area, when they were concerned about bringing in white shoppers, focused on plans for what became known as Shaker Town Center that would, again, make it more appealing to white shoppers, because that was the goal. And Black business owners actually brought a discrimination suit against the development agreement that required Shaker Town Center businesses to be, quote, racially neutral with an equal chance of attracting white and Black shoppers, unquote. And their suit was unsuccessful. So overall, Shaker Town Center was kind of seen by many as kind of a bland and unsuccessful attempt to appeal to white residents while ignoring the demographics, voices, and economic power of the communities that surrounded the shopping center, which at this time were predominantly Black. And that's, I know the 90s was at this point 30 years ago, but we're going to jump into the future now. Could you go to the next one? So this is a list of just very general sources that I used. If there's anything that I brought up today or like an image that you want to know where I got it from, I'm happy to send you more information, but I just could not list absolutely every exact source that I used. But I also wanted to just, in particular, thank Ginny Dawson, who's with us today, because your paper on the Moreland neighborhood was incredibly helpful, and also just helped me kind of steer my talk. And I also wanted to just kind of thank the residents of the Moreland neighborhood because of all of the work that went into kind of gathering the stories from your history that are now available on Cleveland Historical, which I just realized I forgot to list as a source. But all of those articles, again, were just like really helpful for kind of navigating a very complex, long history, and also just finding some images that I was having trouble finding. I think.
I want to say one more
yes.
possible source. So There's also Witness to History, which is Donna White. Dr. Donna White has been running since 2020, since the middle of the beginning of COVID, where monthly she has been interviewing Moreland residents, long-term Moreland residents. And there are about 40 interviews now, and they are all digitized. They're run over Zoom. And then they have been put up on our website in the Moreland neighborhood section, Moreland neighborhood history section of local history. And tonight there's another one, and everybody is welcome to listen in, to join the conversation. You don't really have to talk, but you listen to a conversation between Donna and somebody who's the featured speaker for the month. And there's photographs, and so it's always a really interesting conversation about Moreland neighborhood history and just the history of this one person, but also within their community and Shaker Heights. So I highly recommend tuning in live or seeing all of the recorded interviews, which are on our questions I can direct you, and I can also, Theo Darden, who's the neighborhood revitalization specialist, I forget his exact title, but he works for City of Shaker Heights, and monthly he puts out what's happening in the neighborhoods, and that the Witness to History link is always in that newsletter, and I'm happy to send that to anybody who wants to grab me.
Sorry. Okay, so you can go something. So I was a project manager for a process that's happened in the last couple of years, which is the Lee Road Action Plan. And so that started with a vision, and I too started working exactly when the pandemic started. So I walked into Shaker Heights City Hall, they handed me a computer, and then I went home for the next year and a half. So so my history starts here about the same time that Brianna's does. But the idea that had been decided at that point was that we were going to look at Lee Road from border to border in Shaker. And the idea is that the area that sort of shows red, which is all of Lee Road within Shaker, is going to be narrowed. There's going to be a road diet, which basically means we take 4 lanes, we turn it into 3 lanes, kind of like it is in Cleveland Heights when you go north, with a turning lane and a lane in each direction, and then some little edges, which are bike shoulders. So it will help slow traffic, make it better for all users of traffic. And also a traffic study was done to confirm that it wouldn't result in a mass chaos on the streets. It will work. And then the idea is that the Lee Road Action Plan was to focus on Van Agen to Shaker border, and actually a couple blocks into the city of Cleveland. So in working with our group, we started the master plan. We had a group of stakeholders from throughout Shaker Heights and in Cleveland. And we wanted to find out what the goal of the project was. The goal, so the idea was we would rejuvenate the corridor through public investment, but also that rejuvenation that the city would undertake would help incentivize private investment in the future. And this shows the goals and the vision for the project, which was to create a vibrant commercial district, and then also look at sort of 4 buckets of what we might do. We might work on transportation, the use of land, the buildings that get built, economic development, how can we support and increase businesses, and then engage in the community in that master planning process. Got it. I figured out how to move it on here too. Okay, it's the down. Okay, so we had 3 phases of community engagement. The idea was we weren't just going to have 3 meetings and make everybody come to the Stephanie Tubbs Jones building or to the library. We were going to invite people to do those sorts of things, but also we were going to kind of meet people where they were. And so, again, we started this process and we were doing things sort of in person, but also on Zoom. And we asked people what they wanted the corridor to be in a Zoom meeting, and people typed things in, and the bigger things meant more people typed those words in, and the smaller things mean fewer people typed those in. So you can kind of see vibrant, welcoming, walkable as being the biggie, attractive. And so the key takeaways is that people thought the corridor was too car-centric, it was visually unappealing, they wanted to preserve the existing businesses as well as the trees, and then they wanted to add multiple use development, family-friendly businesses. We heard that from a lot of people, add public spaces, and then improve the safety of the roadway there, both for the drivers as well as the people who are biking and walking in the district. So that was phase one, was sort of like bigger meetings. Phase two was where we really started to dig in and shape the meeting. So we had a series of meeting in person and virtual. We had 17 different meetings during this phase. We did an online survey where we asked people for their input and their preferences on the corridor. The consultant at this time developed 3 concepts that were created, and we gave people we met with citizens, we met with business owners. I know Catherine Sterinsky's here. She and I had lots of one-on-one and group meetings with all of the business owners and property owners in the district, as well as institutions, to find out what they wanted for the district. We went out to the Moreland Neighbor Night, which is on the left, which is in Shelton Park. And we had computers and iPads for people to fill out things. We had plans for people to draw on. And then here I'm at the, I'm going to block on the senior living right at the corner of Chagrin and Lee. We met a couple times with, it was all women, women they're finding out what they wanted and learning from, on the left, a 10-year-old girl, and from people who are seniors. And the perspectives are just super helpful. Like the senior said, we need more benches. We need to stop and rest when we walk for a little bit. And the kids, when we were meeting, I can go to the next slide, we also met with some young teens who kept telling me it had to have a cool vibe. And I was like, what does that mean to a 16-year-old boy, what a cool vibe is? So we just kept meeting with different people. On the right, that's me in someone's living room, and I think on Lindholm. Again, we had people kind of pull together small groups of people so we could really have one-on-one conversations about what people wanted, what they didn't want. We also walked, what a better way to decide what feels good and doesn't feel good than to walk the neighborhood. And we also created a bike in conjunction with Bike Cleveland. So on the left, you see people biking. On the right, that's me and Joyce Braverman, our planning director, walking with a group of people and seeing what felt right. And then this is actually people stopping. I think that was actually in Cleveland. The bike ride went into Cleveland and into Shaker, so people could feel what those transitions would feel like. And then we had a big meeting at the end. A great way to get people to come to your meeting is to offer a free ice cream truck at the end and free pizza during the meeting. So we had lots of people show up, and we worked at tables together. We had a presentation. People scribbled on the drawings about what they liked and they didn't like. We talked together with boards where people stuck stickers on what they liked. And then at the end, we celebrated by having ice cream outside, which was just a fun way to end the meeting. So at that meeting, what I talked about, there were 3 options for people to choose from. So there was the modern Main Street on the left. And these are just pictures of other places that kind of gave people a sense of what we were talking about. Modern Main Street is sort of a smaller 1- and 2-story buildings, feels like a sort of old-fashioned Main Street. A neighborhood centered was there sort of like a core place in the middle where people would gather. And then we, with expanded community services, mix of uses, and also talked about expanding Shelton Park in the location of where the bus garage currently is. And then there was a density-driven transformation, which was much higher density. We heard from people that they sort of wanted a mixture of the two on the left. And so the consultant then proceeded with trying to figure out the best way to merge what we heard from people at those meetings into a final plan. Next slide. We heard on the roadway, people liked the idea of a median section so that if you were crossing the road, it didn't feel so overwhelming. You could stop in the middle and wait for traffic to break, as well as an off-road trail that you could bike on and walk on, and with some street safe. As far as parking, existing parking in the district is pretty much every building has its own parking lot, which I'll get to a little bit later. So people like the idea of combining parking in places that were convenient for everybody and not just one space per each business. And then pedestrian standpoint, people like the idea of the mid-block crossings, just so that they don't have to wait so far to get along.
It's an interesting parking structure that you used.
Whoops. They used the one that's getting torn down. It served its time. I think we didn't know that at the time, but yeah. So this is a lot on here, and this is all on the city's website for the Lee Road Action Plan. But what this tells you is one of the things we didn't want to do in the plan was to be like everybody's pie in the sky ideas, and we draw this plan up, and then we talk to developers, and they're like, we can't do that. Like, there's no demand for that. So it was important that part of the team, there was a person who did an economic development analysis and a market demand to make sure that what people wanted would actually work. And so on the lighter green is what community told us that they wanted, and on the right in the darker green is what the market demand met. All of this is to say that everything people wanted is there's market demand for. Or just about everything people wanted. So that was really helpful for us in moving forward with creating the plan to make sure that it would work. Next slide. So in effect, this is the plan. And again, I would encourage everyone to go to our website, which is, we just changed our website. So it's shakerheightsoh.gov/Lee Road or Lee Action Plan. And I have a link at the end. So we kind of broke it down into different groups. The Lee Road Configuration Project, which is one, which is like what we talked about, just redoing the road, doing the road diet. The Neighborhood Center is sort of the center of the district, and that's based around the area on both sides of the street where the bus garage is. The Southern Gateway, on this plan, Shaker ends. Right, okay. So this is Shaker Cleveland border. So we worked to include several blocks into Cleveland as a transition in working with the City of Cleveland planners and leadership. And so we also have been in constant communication with them about how we implement this. And then improvements around the intersection at Van Eyck and Lee and Chagrin and Lee, intersection improvements at Kenyon, which will help make the intersection at Chagrin and Lee work better. And then looked at shared parking and access and infill development in areas where there isn't good development or any development. Next one. So this is sort of a cross section through the area. This sort of shows you, this is looking, if you were standing and looking north on Lee Road. So we narrow it to 3 lanes. We add more on the side where the dealership is. We add more sidewalk space. And a path, other way. We add more sidewalk space and a path that can be used for bicyclists and off-road path. And then we create planting strips on both sides to really make this feel like a place that you're gonna wanna walk in. Next. So I'm gonna kind of do like a quick overview of what we want. So from a parking standpoint, we talked a little bit about how people wanted the parking to be. People wanted better sidewalks, better seating, landscaping, lighting, benches, better bus stops, public art, some sustainable aspects built in, and then also pedestrian connections into the neighborhood. If I live in the neighborhood, I want to be able to get here more easily. Next one. So this is the whole plan. I have a giant poster of this on the side of my wall because there's a lot to take in. But again, the neighborhood center is the center. At the far left, you see where, well, I'll just kind of walk down it. Here's where we are now. This is Stephanie Tubbs Jones. The idea is that perhaps there could be an indoor recreation or mixed use development here, right at the transit station. The cemetery's here. The idea is at Chagrin and Lee, there might be some new development here that kind of brings this corner together, kind of like some of those old slides that Brianna showed where the commercial went right up to the street. Looking and continuing on, having a little node here at Lomond where that public art is. These red buildings are sort of infill where there isn't development right now. An idea where here we could have a shared parking that served all of the buildings. And then this is where the bus depot is now, which abuts Shelton Park. The idea is that Shelton Park kind of combine in. This is all new proposed mixed use development. One of the things I'm going to back up a little bit with a plan. You think about the Van Eyck district, that did not happen overnight. That was 20 years in the making. And so with plans, you do your big vision and you just sort of peck off the little things as you go and keep moving the plan forward. So that's a big node. And we heard very strongly from the neighborhood. They loved the idea of improving and expanding Shelton Park and tying it better into the this new neighborhood center of mixed use development, more shared parking, and then a southern gate where we sort of build around that Lee Scottsdale building that she showed and do more mixed use that kind of goes over both cities, creating sort of a node at the border that is shared by Shaker and by Cleveland. And then in Cleveland, it's a little bit different. The development pattern is very different in Cleveland. Their buildings are closer to the street. Their blocks are really short, which makes it more walkable. They've got more restaurants. You may not know this, but restaurants are not allowed in Shaker, and the zoning does not allow Shaker restaurants on Lee Road in Shaker. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to look at the zoning. That's on our list of things to do, because everyone said, I'd really like to go get breakfast on Lee Road. So this is sort of the overview. And then I'm going to go kind of quickly. Oh, next slide, sorry. So then this is just kind of zoning in. We heard from people they wanted indoor basketball, maybe better playground at the intersection by the Stephanie Tubbs Jones, better signalization and better crossings for people to get across. One of the things I heard when I talked with the seniors is like, there's not enough time to cross the street. I push the button, but I can't get across the street in enough time. So we have gotten some money for updated signalization as part of the plan. Next slide.
We'll go back. What's the infill development? That's like where Heinen's is, right?
Yeah. Well, Heinen's is back up at the tippy top. This is where that new university hospitals.
Okay.
Thanks. Parking lot of it was all big, right? So next one. And then we also looked at redoing the intersection at Kenyon. What we heard and found when we talked to businesses, as well as people who drive on that stretch, is, first of all, you think about it, whenever someone comes out of Kenyon, the traffic on those two busy streets has to stop. And the light, if you're leaving Kenyon to get into that intersection, lasts for about 3 cars, and people see that light turn green and they gun it to get through the intersection because they know they're going to have to wait a really long time if they miss the light. It's not safe for anybody, not really necessary. And so the idea is that Kenyon would be changed to one-way in. Catherine and I worked very closely with all of the businesses to make sure that they could get their deliveries. Because one of the proposals was just to cut it off altogether. And they were like, we have delivery trucks that have to get behind our businesses. So we worked, closely with people to do that. And there's some new expanded plazas and a new plaza in front of the veterinary hospital. So an additional parking so people can park there and run into the restaurants and things like that. Next.
I wonder, any thoughts to like weekend closure, like when businesses don't need deliveries, would there be a
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think we didn't talk about that, but that's something that, much like happens at Van Aken, for example, it could happen for a festival or something like that with approval of fire and police. The fire department also, is back there too. But yeah, that's something that could be discussed. Next slide. And so this is from Kenyon going south. And again, we narrow the roadway, we do improvements, we infill, where it might be appropriate. And we install some possibly raised medians to slow people down. And also do that shared parking arrangement. Next slide. So this is the park. This is where the baseball field is now, but we heard from people they thought it would be cool to have a place where food trucks could come. They talked about an outdoor stage. There's a big arts community in the Southern Moreland neighborhood, and they've had concerts and poetry readings and plays. And so they thought, well, that would be really cool for us to have an outdoor stage. Also areas to sit, and the playground is very, very popular. That whole park is popular. So, and then the other thing they talked about is adding a little parking over to the right, and then in the front, and which would be along Lee Road at the top, is tying that into a public plaza with some public art, and then some commercial buildings, but also some more parking, because people talk about they come there to have their kid play baseball, and there's just not a good place for people to park. So that was one of the things that we've talked about. Next one. So I'm just going to real quick. This is what we see now. This is the bus garage is over to your left. So this is kind of what you look like if you stand and you're looking sort of northwest. You see the buses in the background. And then next slide. This is the proposed new vision. So you see crosswalks, medians, benches, bike racks, people kind of connecting from the neighborhood, new buildings that are anywhere from 1 story to 3 or 4 stories tall, outdoor dining, lights, new lighting. And then the next slide. So that sort of shows you what that town center was going to be. The Southern Gateway, again, I talked a little bit about it. It's, more mixed use buildings, and integrating those with existing buildings. It was really important that we kept the existing businesses and supported them in ways. And so the next slide. This is what we look at now. If we're looking, the building, the Lee Scottsdale building is just on our left here. So we're looking sort of northeast. And then the next slide. That is the vision. And this one shows better what that off-road path could look like. So you see people biking here, but there's also a sidewalk. So the sidewalk users can be separated from the bicyclist users. And it is a great way, you think about if this bikeway would go all the way up to City Hall. So if you needed to get on or off the rapid and hop on your bike and people say, well, no one bikes on Lee Road, so why are you doing this? It's like, would you bike on Lee Road? Like, I would not feel safe biking on Lee Road. And we heard that from people. I'd like to bike on Lee Road, but I also don't want to take my life into my hands. And so this was what we heard almost universally from everybody. Like, this would be a great way for me to get to all the places I need to get. Next slide. And right now, we're waiting to hear from the county. We applied for $200,000 worth of grants to, this is a very early sketchy idea from the plan. But to take each, to get funding in conjunction with the property owners to turn what is a parking lot and one curb cut or two curb cuts for every single business there and turn it into something that's more efficient. We heard from people never know how to get into my business. You're not sure which curb cut belongs to each business. This would organize it, make it more efficient. We can actually gain parking by doing this. And the thing that I think is the best is, and for anyone who's walked down here, first of all, you're walking on a sidewalk and cars are overhanging the sidewalk because there's nothing separating them. And you've got cars parked this way, you got cars parked this way, you got cars parked this way. And look at this, driveway. So about every fourth step you take in that section, you're in a driveway. So as a walker, it feels awful. And so that doing this gets us we're working on a better plan for the parking, but it gets us a little bit of a buffer between the sidewalk and the paving. We're actually looking at flipping the parking closer to the curb so we can get more landscaping and just make it work more efficiently. And we have a group of property owners who are really supportive and excited about that idea. But we're waiting to hear from the county, which I think the county funds will make or break whether we can move forward with this. Next slide. So our timeline and our budget, we're going to start engineering later this year. We again have been working on generating excitement and collaboration. We have regular meetings. We have conversations with people at the county, conversations with the city of Cleveland who intend to improve their stretch of Lee Road from the Shaker border all the way down to to Miles. So they're looking at they're sort of a little bit behind us in their planning process, but they're working with traffic engineers and the community to figure out what's the best way for them to get better bike infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure in their stretch. And then the planned construction would start in 2027 in Shaker, and we're working again to figure out when Cleveland would do theirs at the same time or not long after. And then our implementation budget this is a $25.8 million project. That covers the roadway, the streetscape, lighting, landscaping, crosswalks, that kind of thing. That doesn't include new buildings or the new park. This is how much it costs to do this sort of baseline infrastructure upon which the rest of this will come. And sort of like you think of Van Aken, they had to fix that terrible intersection before they could develop the Van Aken district. And so that's sort of what we're doing here, is doing that baseline infrastructure. And so the way we're generating this excitement and collaboration is we're talking about public art projects, we're talking about food, retail, and entertainment pop-ups, we're talking about communicating, working with the residents of the neighborhood as well as the commercial district as far as programming, and then we're prioritizing storefront renovation on Lee Road. The Economic Development Department is working with a bunch of businesses, including those ones I just showed you that we're talking about doing the shared parking on investing in their storefronts, making better signage so you can actually find their businesses, and adding landscaping, trees, that kind of thing. Next. And so if you haven't, on your way out of here, we just are very excited about a new piece of public art that got put in at the end of last year between Lee Road. between the library and Lee Road and on city property that's right behind me. Look at it, sort of.
Can't see
You can't see from here. So when you walk to the car, walk around the side of the library and look. This is a donor, former Mayor Rawson and her husband donated this artwork. A New Jersey artist designed it, and the library was very helpful. The New Jersey artist said, we need book names. We need local and regional artists. So we put a sign up. I literally walked the sign in, and it took like 30 seconds for these two little girls to be like, what's going on? And people wrote down their favorite books, the books titles that were chosen were by local, a lot of Shaker authors and also greater Northeast Ohio authors. They're just a fun, colorful celebration. So that was sort of like our first building excitement along Lee Road project. Next slide. So if you're interested, this is one of the picture of the book, and we will be having a dedication on Friday, March 1st. I think we're in the same room. I think we're here, and then we're going to go out and dedicate the artwork. It's a Friday. Next slide. So this, I guess, just again to summarize, this is the sort of plan that we're implementing, and then you can go to the next. And Brianna and I are both here to answer questions. And both of the websites, their website as well as the city's website, are up there.
Well, so I grew up in Lee Harbor neighborhood. So Shaker Heights, I student taught in Shaker, so I have a strong connection with the neighborhood. I know that they've already completed their master plan. The last meeting might have been in January. And so I know that for what I was having a conversation with some of the people that you work with, they were trying to make sure they had a consistent identity going from Shaker all the way down to Miles, just to ensure that there's some continuity, making sure that when you stop at Walden, that it just looks totally different.
Right.
Because as you know, like I said, my family owned a house in Sudbury. We owned it in the 60s. And, I think we have to create a mutual beneficial plan where everyone be able to benefit from it.
Right. So absolutely. And that intersection in our stakeholder group was the planning director for the city of Cleveland, Joyce Wong. And then she's now the assistant director, but she was the neighborhood planner, Margaret Fields, who was the area of Cleveland's planner. And, they were on calls with us, and we'd say like, okay, well, what do you think? Like, how can we do this? And so I know that they've got kind of two parallel plans. They've got the sort of master plan, and I was at some of those meetings that were at the Harvard Community Services Center. And then they also have a different group that's got more traffic engineering focused on looking at, what the traffic is, how that works. Because it's a very different, it's much more short, nice little residential blocks in Cleveland, right? Which is much more walkable in ways because it's more connected to the neighborhood. So it makes it better as far as connecting, but a little bit harder because every time, like on our off-road bike path, every time you pass an intersection, there's a place where someone on a bike and someone in a car can hit each other. So from the standpoint in Shaker, where we have these long blocks that make it hard to connect to the neighborhoods, which is bad, it also has long blocks where people can ride on a bike and not have that potential collision location.
Right. I think they said the Lee Harbor intersection is like one of the worst throughout the whole state of Ohio.
Oh yeah,
so
high crash.
They're trying to make it that 3-lane concept.
Yeah, and I know they're still working with the traffic engineers to figure, what works and what doesn't work. So, but there was a lot of conversation because obviously it can't just totally change at the border. There has to at least be some transition between, what the plan is. And so there's lots of conversations that happen. And I've got to really know those people over there. And it's a great group of people. So, yeah.
Yes. In the budget, is there money that's been set aside to continue to have preventative maintenance for sidewalk areas, planting areas, storefronts, the parking areas? I've been involved in several different communities where they get the grants that they need, but then they don't then afterwards have that money to then maintain the plantings that continue, even the garbage cans, little things like that, so that cleaning up, maintenance of that community can continue to stay. Is that sort of been built in, or does that become something else?
So the budgeting in Shaker is something I've become very familiar with, and it's so right now, the budget now that I showed up there is for building things. And a lot of that money, luckily, is coming from other sources and not the city. But the city also has like a long-term budget where they know like, okay, if we build more things, we're gonna need more money to maintain those things. So they work that into the budget that goes forward over the years. But also at the same time, our economic development department is working with the merchants and the property owners in the sort of Chagrin-Lee area, talking about something that's called a special improvement district or a business improvement district. And that's basically where everybody in this certain order agrees that we're all gonna pitch in and put in, basically tax ourselves. And that bucket of money then comes from maintenance like plowing sidewalks or planting, hanging flower pots or watering the flower pots. And so places like Coventry Village and Cedar Fairmount have those sorts of things. And so it's a way for the business owners to decide together, like what, in conjunction with the city, but also like what are our values here? Do we want to save money to have a street festival, or do we want to do, plowing, or do we want to do plants, or, whatever it is. So there's sort of multiple conversations. The city is, building it, but also anticipating maintenance, but also working with the merchants and the property owners to do that as well. Questions for this lady? I want to look back at the slides again. Will you post this on the Historical Society website?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all recorded.
Sorry, but I like to look at the slide deck. Yeah.
I'm gonna say something. Sure. So again, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you appreciate the amount of work that both Brianna and Kara put into this presentation. I was like overwhelmed by the information. It was just really great. Thank you for all the work that you did. And I also want to recognize, I think, Catherine Lee. Pardon? She just left. Oh, okay. Catherine Stravinsky, who is rotating off our board. I just wanted to recognize and thank her for her time on the board. She was our vice president for about 3 or 4 years. So, and thank you again. And there's some refreshments in the back. And Brianna, you want to say anything? No?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.